So next on the agenda is Forever 21 is filing for bankruptcy again. Those of you that remember would remember that Forever 21 has actually filed for bankruptcy in the past. This is not the first time. And it really shows because a lot of companies and, brand stores have all been closing down. And I think we're entering a new era of fast fashion. It's kind of strange. All the fast fashion companies, the H&Ms, the Forever 21s, we've seen Pretty Little Thing rebranding to try and compete with Shein. I think the business model of Shein has completely decimated the fast fashion industry as a whole. A lot of these fast fashion companies are really struggling to fight and compete with the way that they do things. I think Shein is going to actually put a lot of fast fashion companies and businesses in the dust, in the red. They're going to put them all out of business, to be honest. And we've talked about the business model. We talked about the difference between Shein and other fast fashion brands and why they're able to bring stuff to market so quickly. So check out my past videos on that if you're not too aware what we are talking about. But I think this is just another victim of Shein, to be honest. But let's read on as we read about Forever 21 filing for bankruptcy once again. So in 2025, things are a bit different. So they're saying the year is 2009, you're a sophomore at a big public high school. That's very assuming of someone's age, MSNBC, but reading on. The seasons are just starting to change. You've got babysitting money in your black long sharp tote, your favorite very pink North Face fleece jacket on, and there is a school dance with a DJ on a Friday night. Please don't ever say that again in an article. I'm not trying to envision myself in northern New Jersey wearing North Face. Anyway, moving on. They're basically just setting the scene for the mecca of Forever 21, the 2010s and stuff. And in 2025, of course, things are a bit different. Forever 21 is expected to close 350 stores in the US by May 1st, which is insane. The brand has filed for bankruptcy twice in the past 6 years, blaming falling sales on competition from Chinese mega brands such as Shein and Temu and their staggering online inventories. At its peak, Forever 21 employed 43,000 people and generated more than $4 billion in annual sales. So yeah, they kind of just talked about what I was talking about, where a lot of these fast fashion brands really struggle to compete with the mega fast fashion of Shein and it's so hard. So yeah, they're going to put a lot of these businesses, out. And something I also find really interesting is I think that Shein has kind of changed the way that these people do business, right? Because there's too much overhead. So many of these companies have way too many stores and they're paying really expensive rents and they pay for all these staff members, whereas Shein bypasses that because they don't have close to near as many stores globally, so they're not paying the crazy rent fees, and they don't have all the retail staff that the likes of a Forever 21 would have, or an H&M and that sort of stuff. So it's really, really difficult to compete with a company like that. And I think this is just the start. Over the next 5 years, we're going to see probably most fast fashion brands go under unless they are bankrolled by a massive conglomerate or big company. But reading on. I shouldn't feel a thing about Forever 21 shutting its sliding glass doors for good. My shopping habits have entirely changed in the last 15 years, favoring fewer, often vintage, high quality items over the abundance of low quality, cheap, and trendy wares the retailer has sold for decades, which is good. This is definitely very good. Like they're talking about, Forever 21 burst onto the scene initially out of the 2008 financial crisis. There was a freedom and independence in the low prices, apparent lamenting that the clothing looked cheap and was poor quality, but which you bought on your own was nearly a rite of passage. In hindsight, though, Forever 21 was a primer, normalizing the concept of fast fashion for very young shoppers. The expectation became on-trend pieces for very low prices all the time, everywhere. It was well understood that you might get a handful of wares out of a Forever 21 item if you were lucky. Generally, you bought a metallic bodycon skirt and a pair of jeggings. Oh my God, jeggings. Do you guys remember when jeggings were really popular? That was a terrible time. Everyone used to wear those jeggings that they wear once and then it ends up in landfills because after one wash, they start to get holes and stuff. Insane. Just the friction from you walking could destroy your jeggings. What a time to be alive, guys. What a time to be alive. But reading, you would wear a bodycon skirt or a pair of jeggings with the intention of wearing them once or twice. If your new tank top disintegrated after a single wash, well, that was the price you paid. And it's very interesting that the journalist brought this up in the article, because I think this kind of understanding and us being socialized into thinking this sort of stuff is okay is the reason why, once again, I'm always fighting with people in the chat where they're trying to tell me that, yeah, but people can't afford any different. I think it's more of a cultural thing. There was a stat that said that the typical Shein order is actually $100 order. So it's nothing to do with affordability. It's just people wanting to buy loads of different clothing and have insane amounts of variety, even though most of it they're not going to wear. Most of it, if anything, is going to be worn once. And it's just like a wasteful way of seeing fashion. I think that culture was definitely built upon the business models of a lot of fast fashion brands, including the likes of Forever 21. So it's very good that that was mentioned and brought upon in the article. Forever 21's organizational system, which at the time seemed bizarre and illogical to me, paved the way for the aesthetics we see dominating social media and the fashion space today. The clothes were not grouped by item, but by trend. In 2009, for example, there would have been an entire corner brimming with fluorescent tank tops, skirts, and bandage dresses, perfect for the neon-themed school dance. TikTok often categorizes user style as a specific aesthetic in a similar way: mod wife, clean girl, ballet core. And this is very interesting because that's very true. Forever 21 did kind of sell clothing in trends. It's kind of like the TikTok brand before the TikTok brands existed. Those TikTok brands that everything they offer is what's trending on TikTok at a certain point in time. And those companies actually make loads of money because they perfectly sit in the market that they basically just, fulfill the need at the specific time that there is that need on TikTok, and they have TikTok shop connected to it. These kids are really smart with how they do business these days. They're really intelligent. Even though I don't like the way that necessarily the clothing, but I think the business model, there's a lot to learn there for sure. But Forever 21 was definitely one of the earlier adopters of like kind of selling you a whole trend in one look. It's so funny because I totally forgot about how influential Forever 21 was in that realm. It's so true. And I'm sure it would have been even more so in the US, because obviously I grew up in the UK in London. So it was less as influential as the likes of, Top Man and stuff like that. But I'm sure in the US it had people in an absolute chokehold, to be honest. But yeah, let's read on. Let's just skip that. They're talking about how Forever 21 was at the forefront. It's very true. But I thought it was interesting because I wanted kind of two perspectives when it comes to this Forever 21 story, kind of a more businessy perspective and then a more like nostalgic perspective to kind of see what Americans thought specifically of Forever 21, because I think that America would have had the cultural impact of Forever 21 that I just wouldn't have experienced myself living in the UK. But for the more businessy perspective, of course, we can always rely on the trusty BOF making sense of this week's big fashion bankruptcies. News of Forever 21 and Hudson Bay's facing liquidation this week rang alarm bells for an industry already facing macroeconomic challenges this year, but their failures could have been avoided. So it should be interesting to see how exactly some of these failures could have been avoided. Of course, like we mentioned earlier, Forever 21 filed for bankruptcy protection for the second time in 6 years. Red and yellow liquidation sale signs are already plastered on the windows of hundreds of its US stores. Meanwhile, Canada's oldest department store, Hudson's Bay, needs an immediate financial lifeline or it will be forced to close 80 stores, as well as 3 Saks Fifth Avenue stores and 13 Saks off Fifth locations that the company operates through a licensing agreement. Also, it just shows, what all of this shows is that a lot of companies are just realizing that there's too much overhead with having too many stores in a digital age. Because for the longest time, yes, people bought things online, but online sales didn't really account for a massive, amount of sales for a lot of these big companies. And as time has progressed, they've realized more and more that online accounts for more and more of their sales. And so now having all these stores is kind of useless when most people shop online anyway. There are more options. Like someone like me, for example, I never really shop in store because most times they won't have my size in store. Most times my size is like the weird size that they only have 2 in stock online. So going in store is kind of a waste of time. And the only time I go in store is maybe just to see kind of what a brand is showing and selling at the time. It's not necessarily to try things on because I already know they won't have stuff in my size. So I think a lot of companies are realizing that that tends to be the case for a lot of people, and they're closing stores and they're going into bankruptcy because the overheads just don't make sense these days. I think it makes sense to have some physical locations, but I think a lot of these companies have way too many, way too many. Duke says, I never shop high street online. Interesting. But yeah, the twin bankruptcy sets alarm bells ringing in an industry already reeling from an unexpected plunge in US consumer confidence and President Donald Trump's tariff spree. Yeah, that has been a mess. Of course, I did make a video on how Trump's tariffs will affect fashion. However, I need to do an update on that because there have been loads of retaliations from so many different countries. And I think if Trump isn't careful, he's going to destroy a lot of American businesses based on the retaliation we're seeing from a lot of countries, especially China. So that definitely has been a cause for concern for a lot of these companies. And a lot of them have definitely taken a hit because of Trump's madness with the tariffs. Even though Trump claims everything he's doing is to defend American companies. But if you actually look at the numbers, that isn't completely the case. It really isn't the case, to be honest. We're reading on. But the failures of Forever 21 and Hudson's Bay shouldn't be regarded as harbingers for the industry as a whole. In fact, there have been fewer bankruptcies so far in 2025 compared with the same period last year, according to S&P Global data. Since its first bankruptcy in 2019, Forever 21, under its new owners, Authentic Brands Group, and mall landlords Simon Property and Brookfield Asset Management struggled to come up with an answer to the rise of Shein and so yeah, kind of what I thought was the issue with a lot of these brands. Everyone is kind of saying the same thing, that a lot of these fast fashion companies are really struggling to compete in any way with Shein and Temu. And I've explained to you guys why, but I'm sure in this article they will expand further on exactly how the business model of Shein is just hard to compete with for a lot of these fast fashion brands. But reading on, in a battle waged mainly on price, Forever 21's Chinese competitors operating exclusively online and shipping orders directly from factories were always destined to win. While we have evaluated all options to best position Forever 21 for the future, we have been unable to find a sustainable path forward. Given competition from foreign fast fashion companies, Chief Financial Officer Brad said in a statement on Sunday. Authentic Brands Group will continue to own Forever 21's intellectual property. Other brands from H&M to Gap are threatened by ultra fast fashion as well. So yeah, once again, kind of exactly what I said earlier when we were reading the other article, that we will see many other fast fashion brands struggle to keep up with Shein. It's just inevitable. In 5 years, we're going to see many more, unless they completely overhaul their business model, which is close to impossible to do. We're going to see a lot of them go under, to be honest. But reading on, other brands from H&M to Gap are threatened by ultra fast fashion as well, but have done more to differentiate their product and are investing heavily to ensure their in-store experience draws shoppers rather than them sending them to Shein's app. So let me show you guys something, by the way, just as a case study for you guys that I've noticed. So this is why, for example, Zara has put so much money in stuff like, for example, stuff like this, collaborating with Stefano Pilati and having, Zara engineered by Stefano Pilati, because they are now understanding that, okay, on the fast fashion side, we cannot compete. So the only way we can compete is if we go more luxury. And therefore, if we're more luxury, we become more, appealing, and we can charge higher prices. And that is basically how we keep up with the likes of Shein and stuff and these ultra fast fashion brands, right? That's why we also see things like, Samuel Ross engineered by Zara and stuff like that, for example, because they're really trying to garner expertise from really well storied, well celebrated designers and build on that expertise to bring back to their main line and kind of differentiate themselves from the pack. It's the same reason why H&M has invested a lot and invested heavily in a lot of luxe collaborations. They already did H&M before, but they're investing even more into it now. So that's why we're seeing this kind of shift where we used to have segments where it was like, it used to be fast fashion was like Top Man and Zara, and then there was that mid tier, which is like more like COS, Arquette, and then there's upper mid, which is more like Joseph and Sandro, and then there's a tier over that and a tier over that. Now the low tier is now Shein. So the likes of Zara and H&M and all these kind of people, they don't want to be seen as ultra fast. So they've realized that they need to associate themselves with luxury more to kind of not be seen there and to sit in a place that's kind of more luxe than that. So it's very interesting how we're seeing kind of all these different markets kind of jump up one because Shein has come into the fold. So it's very interesting. Yeah, I just literally, that's what's on the screen. Zara, engineered by Samuel Ross. That's what's on the screen. Also, someone was saying that Mango collaborated with Victoria Beckham. Exactly why. Exactly. The collaboration with Massimo Dutti. Exactly. So I've noticed that's been going on. And this is the exact reason why these brands are doing this. If you didn't know why this is happening, this is exactly why. Just to give you some context as to why things are happening this way. But reading on, fellow mall retailer PacSun, for instance, has fully recovered from its 2016 bankruptcy and managed to become top of mind among young consumers in recent years through various collaborations and cultural marketing initiatives. Hudson's Bay's demise is a more complicated story. The department store chain never recovered from pandemic-related challenges and the decline in visitors at brick and mortar stores in Canada, according to its bankruptcy filing. The lasting impacts of the pandemic, including the widespread and continuing trend towards remote work, has decreased further still foot traffic at retail stores and increased associate economic pressures, the company said in a court filing. So we don't need to read on. I think you guys get the memo. I just kind of wanted to read the specifics, but this is why we are seeing a new era of fast fashion. It's like a new age, a new dawn of fast fashion, where Shein is going to be ultra fast. Any brand that tries to compete with Shein is going to be evaporated from the ether and is going to cease to exist. And the brands that remain are brands that are going to have to rebrand and therefore kind of sit in a more luxe realm. Where COS and Arquette used to sit in the market is where the likes of Zara and H&M are going to start sitting. It's almost like the fast fashion X luxury dichotomy reflects how extreme the wealth distribution has become. That's very true. Except the financially smart thing to do in a pinch is to save up to buy better quality instead of going for desperate $5 blouses. Yeah, of course. And that's why maybe past generations were smarter than us, because past generations, even people that were poorer in general, when you look at all the stats, and I've talked about the stats before, statistically, last century, people used to spend a higher proportion of their wage on clothing. Yet they used to buy less clothing. So clearly, there was more of a culture for people wearing the same thing over and over again, saving up money and buying that one high quality piece. That was more the culture than what our culture is, which is more buy low quality things that you can wear once, and at least you can always wear different outfits, because woe is me, God forbid you actually wear something more than once or twice. You know what I mean? So completely different mentality in terms of consumer spending. H&M and Zara have no other choice but to punch up, because they will definitely lose if they slug it out with Temu and Shein. Exactly. People back then were educated via fashion-wise and are more aware of the quality. Yeah, that's true. But part of the reason why people are not that educated on quality is because of the marketing and the branding. Brands don't want you to be educated on quality, because if you are, you wouldn't buy a lot of their brands. So that's why it's very important that they don't talk about quality, and they make sure that the conversation is never about teaching people about actual good quality clothing. That's not what they are going for. That's not their goal, to be honest. So yeah, that's the story around Forever 21's bankruptcy, and why I also think that we are starting to see the death of fast fashion as we know it, and kind of fast fashion is changing, where a lot of fast fashion brands are going to reposition into a more luxury brand positioning and brand segment, and then Shein is going to take over as the new big, brand in fast fashion. So yeah. This YouTube channel runs on your support. If you want to support the channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon. You'll gain access to exclusive content that includes everything from my Patreon podcast, where I give a behind-the-scenes insight into the fashion industry, as well as a fashion book club, where I review my favorite fashion books. You can also check out my fashion ebook, which highlights the best fashion journalists to follow, definitions of common fashion terminology, and how to determine what a good source of fashion information is. The links to everything are in the description below.